Uh, First devlog for GraphX. I am teaching myself how to code in C++, how to use OpenGL, and how to make a game engine, all at the same time. So, a bit tricky, a bit difficult, but I like the challenge, and it is something I'm motivated to do because, I don't know, just mainly I'm really disillusioned with modern game engines, especially Unreal Engine 5, and how bloated and, just full of bad practices and bad defaults and just, TAA and upscaling as like a crutch and God forbid, fucking Lumen doesn't seem too bad at first glance. I haven't looked too deep into it, but um see the other one, they're like LOD thing. Shit. Forgot the name. Whatever. I'm disillusioned with modern game engines, and I want to learn how to make my own so I can, I don't know. The dream is to make the best game engine. You can't, of course. It's very subjective. They're all different and useful for certain things, right? If you want to make a really efficient game engine, then you want to make it really focused on what you're working for. But I want to make a slightly generalized game engine that is, the a bit of impossible dream goal that motivates me and fuels my fat fire is to, make one that is the best, or at the very least, tries to be the most efficient. Anyway, got a bunch of notes in here. I've gone through a bunch of stuff already. Like I know how to render objects to the screen and vertex attribute objects and buffer objects and entity buffer objects and all that jazz. So I'm now working on the fundamentals of the rendering loop. Basically, like I'm trying to figure out how I want to render objects dynamically, because you could just hard code everything and you can just write all the GL functions to render, a cube to the screen. But what if I want to render more than just a cube or something different, You have to make sure that it can render not just this specific thing, but anything. And that's where I'm getting stuck, or at the very least, that's where I am breaking away from the mold, hopefully. I hope this doesn't sound super pretentious, because I know that it is, and I know it's like an impossible, like, I want to be better than everyone. I want to use that to drive me, but I don't want to use that as an expectation, because I could be wrong, and I'm also not going to be the best at, anything, because it's pretty difficult to be the best. Anyway, my idea is, I've been kind of like thinking a lot and watching a lot of videos and seeing a lot of stuff about functional programming versus object-oriented. I think object-oriented programming is fine, but fundamentally object-oriented programming deals with a logic that is nice for humans, but not so great for a machine that is, built on a logic. I mean, it is just set-based logic, and set-based logic is kind of flawed because it's human. And, you shouldn't chase perfection. Like, the difference between... there's no, like, real performance or efficiency gain right now with what I'm thinking about. But I do like the idea of, I don't know, just knowing that it is slightly faster or more efficient or whatever, to be more functional than object-oriented. And specifically, a lot of things I'm seeing, and examples I'm seeing on the internet of how to implement a rendering loop is with a renderer. And usually that's a class that, handles rendering. The problem I have with that is that it's almost always done by making a renderer class, and a bunch of other ones, that only get used once. There's only ever going to be one renderer. So why are you making a class? A class in programming is, like, it is supposed to be a template for objects, and then you will have a bunch of them. That's why you make a class, so you can make a bunch of versions of this base type. But if you only have ever, like, one renderer, that renderer class is, like, in my opinion, it's stupid. You just have one thing of this. Just why make a template when you're only going to have one thing? Why can't you just have one, like, and there probably is, like, I'm very, I'm on like my first month of learning C++, coming from on and off, you know, JavaScript, Java in school, Python. So, you know, like, I don't know a lot of very in-depth stuff about this. And there is probably a way to have like a one and done class type of system, like a class object, but it's not a class, it is just one singular thing. Maybe a struct, but I know the struct is pretty much just a class, but like with less bloat. My idea is I want to be rid of that system of having a class, a renderer class. So my idea right now is every actor, because I am modeling this after Doom, I want to model my game objects after Doom because I love John Carmack and I'm autistic. So I will have actors and thinkers, and actors can be rendered. Actors will have, if you give them one, will have a model, and that model will have a mesh, and the mesh will have the vertices, and the model will have the texture, the material, and the material will have the texture. The model will also have render commands. What I want to do is I want to make sure all the GL functions, by the way, are handled by one thing, one set of code, one series of functions or whatever, so I can isolate that, and I don't, you know, have to. I don't have that code like scattered around my program, and I want it nice and tidy, which is why you make a renderer class, but I don't want to do that. The model will have render commands with rendering info, and then it will append those rendering commands to a render array, right? Like an array of those commands, and there will only ever be one array, and it's like a global array, and that object will either send the commands or some object will get the commands. I like the idea of sending them so I don't have to make another arbitrary class. And I know about the visitor, not very well, but I know of the visitor idea, right? And I want to look more into that and why it's used, but I don't know. That seems like another making a class, but there's only going to be one or two of them. Anyway. Render commands in the array, then the rendering functions will use the render array and iterate through it, and then when they're done with the command, toss it out and make sure that, you know, so they don't go back and do it again because it's going to loop through it in the main loop. The thing I'm seeing online a lot is that you have a renderer class that will handle that. But I don't want to do that. I want to make it more functional. So I'm thinking of writing a bunch of rendering functions and then just making sure not to use them in any other areas of the code. Because I feel like another reason for making the renderer class is so you can isolate the code, but like, why do that? You know? Why put up like the baby guardrails and be like, don't touch the renderer class, rendering commands, keep it in the class, and don't import that class, you know, or include that class. You know, just make it functional, and then just make sure you don't use them anywhere else. I don't know. Now, there is a reason why this is the status quo, why this is done, and honestly, the potential efficiency difference is negligible, probably. But still, you know, I like the idea of being different, and if this is something that can be done, and potentially is a teeny bit better, I don't know, I'd like to chase that. So, that's where I am, that's what I'm thinking, what I'm doing. And yeah, I would link the GitHub, but it's a bit of a mess right now. I have a couple branches, one of them started from scratch, one of them actual production branch, one of them the main one that has pretty much nothing in it, like one of them full of my stuff from learnopengl.com. So it's a bunch of, it's a big mess. But once I finish the rendering loop and the game tick system I'm going to work on, because I don't want to use delta time, that's a whole other rant for another thing. But once I'm done with that, and I have like a game loop and an actual running, you know, app that hopefully isn't going to completely change and isn't super hard coded, then I think I'll link the GitHub and everything. But yeah, devlog.